Hi, welcome to this episode, and I'm going to be talking about in this episode what to do if you're constantly night snacking or you're even dreaming about food before you go to bed. And this is a really common topic, and this is something that I really love to talk about because night snacking or having late night snacks or midnight snacks or waking up even just because you're hungry is quite an important topic to go through. So I just want to share a story of how I was really struggling with night snacking, having 2 a.m. snacks at night. And first of all, I just want to also say that thanks so much for commenting to request this topic. So going back to the story, when I was struggling with binge eating at my lowest point, I was struggling with binge eating, having 1 meal a day, just having black coffee for breakfast, and just like a tuna salad with, well, essentially this tuna and salad, no rice, no carbs, no bread or anything with it. And then dinner, I would just be having 1 meal a day, and I was just maintaining my six-pack back then physique by just having 1 meal a day, which is essentially a binge. So I'll be binge eating almost every day. Like, trigger warning, I'm going to mention calories. Almost 3,000 calories, 2,000, 3,000 calories. I'll be having pizza, I'll be having ice cream, onion rings. And the strange thing is that I thought I was broken because I'll be having this binge in the evening, but I would wake up around 2 or 3 in the morning and I'd realize, oh, I just had a binge. Why am I still hungry? Why am I still dreaming about food? And I was just really confused. And all of this is happening when I was studying to become a dietitian. So I was having this confusion, like, oh, well, I did have a binge. What's the reason why I'm having these symptoms of deprivation? And it just got to me. Maybe my brain was thinking it's expecting that there's going to be no food in the morning because I didn't have any breakfast. I essentially had black coffee, which is essentially no calories. And the things I would often snack on or even have night meals on were just frequently this packet of microwavable rice and chicken, because I knew I binged, and even in the morning I was trying to eat as low calories as possible to prevent any risk quote unquote of any weight gain. So I wasn't really satisfying myself. And if you struggle with night snacking or even dreaming about food, then this episode is going to be really helpful for you. So if you've been following me for a while, I'm going to have a little overview on this, on the main triggers to binge eating episodes. So the first trigger to binge eating episodes is called physical restriction. So essentially, physical restriction is essentially just being hungry or not eating enough calories. So physical restriction could show up in your day by you skipping meals. You essentially skip breakfast. And remember, coffee is not breakfast. A drink is not breakfast. Maybe you're having an inconsistent meal pattern. Maybe you're having breakfast one day, maybe 2 or 3 days out of the week, and then the rest of the days of the week you're not having breakfast. Maybe you're skipping lunch, maybe you're skipping dinner or your evening meal. So you have to have the consistent meal pattern. If you're eating consistently your breakfast, lunch and dinner 7 days of the week, then that's the most ideal. And another form of physical restriction is maybe you're not having any snacks in between. Maybe you're having breakfast, lunch and dinner, but in between your snack time, you're quite hungry, but you try to avoid snacks as much as possible. So let's say you had breakfast 8 in the morning, then you feel quite hungry at 10 in the morning, but you try to avoid that. You try to push away your hunger. You just try to drink coffee again. Maybe you try to, you try to drink some soda drinks to blunt your appetite, and then lunch would come. And you know by then you're going to be quite really hungry for lunch. So this is a form of physical restriction. Maybe, and finally, and a really important thing is physical restriction could also manifest if you're really under eating calories. So let's say you need 2,000 calories a day and then you're only eating 800 calories. That's clearly physical restriction. You're under-fueling your body. If you've been struggling with binge eating is a symptom of deprivation. Binge eating is not the main problem. We try to focus too much on binge eating, but we try to not place too much focus on why we're binge eating. So to get rid of binge eating, you need to focus on the deprivation, these signs of restriction. So physical restriction is one of the first triggers of binge eating. Second trigger of binge eating is mental restriction. So sure, you could be eating your regular meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, eating every 3 to 4 hours, breakfast, lunch, and dinner with snacks in between, and maybe you're eating enough calories. But mental restriction could manifest if you're having a craving for chocolate bar, you try to push away that craving for chocolate bar. Maybe you have a banana instead. Maybe you just have coffee again to ignore that craving, or diet soda. Each time we say no to our craving psychologically, then we're building up this psychological buildup of cravings. So like every time we say no in our mind, probably if you're struggling with binge eating or mental restriction, you probably say no to the chocolate bar 100 times. It might only show up as even like a millisecond of you saying no in your mind, but that'll happen 100 times truly in your mind. And then eventually when it comes evening time, or when a stressful event happens, you feel quite vulnerable to your emotions, then all of these things in your mind are going to be craving for some source of satisfaction. So you're going to be much more likely to have a craving for that chocolate bar, because you said no so many times, and then the tipping point comes. You're gonna have 5 chocolate bars in one go. So remember, each time a craving comes in, then have that craving. If you're craving for a chocolate bar, don't go for the diet version of the chocolate bar or the cleanest, quote-unquote, version of the chocolate bar. And I'm saying quote-unquote because there's no such thing as clean, but you know what I mean, the lowest calorie version chocolate bar. You go for the thing that you truly desire, so you can get rid of mental restriction. And I get what you might be saying right now. You might be saying, if I give permission to have that chocolate bar, then I'm gonna start a binge eating episode. The thing is, maybe you might, but if you're implementing the eating regular meals, you're trying to avoid physical restriction as much as possible by keeping yourself maybe a 7 or 8 out of 10 full, comfortably full, or you're much less likely to have binge eating episodes because you're keeping yourself comfortably full. So you're probably going to have like a few squares of that chocolate bar and you're going to stop. Maybe if you've been depriving yourself for so long, you might have a few more chocolate bars than you think you might, but you're not going to have a full-on binge eating episode if you're keeping yourself consistently, comfortably full. So essentially, as an little overview, those are the 2 main common triggers of binge eating episodes. So physical restriction, under-eating essentially, and number 2, mental restriction, which is trying to avoid your cravings. So let's go back to the topic of why you might be snacking at night or dreaming about food. So you probably guessed by now that the reason why you might be snacking at night or dreaming about food is because you might be having some form of restriction throughout the day, especially if you struggle with binge eating at night. Restriction physically or mentally, and you need to avoid these restrictions or satisfy yourself physically, aka avoiding physical restriction. So let me talk about the Caveman Era, because when people are struggling with binge eating, this is a really helpful topic for me to talk about. So when people are struggling with binge eating, I really like to talk about the Caveman Era, because it really puts into perspective as a great analogy of why you might be having these intense urges to binge eat. So back then, many years ago, it's probably 1 million years ago, when we were cavemen, cave women, and cave kids, and so many more, then we were essentially binge eating and having restriction. That's the main topic throughout the whole prehistoric era. So when you wake up, you don't have a fridge, there's no food stored. If there was any food kept in the cave where we used to be, it's probably gone off by now. So we'd have these intense urges. Adrenaline would kick in to hunt a mammoth, or fight a tiger, or get a boar, or to run as far as possible to go to the place where there's water or berries, so many more. And then we'd have that meal, that massive meal of that mammoth, or whatever it is, and just have a binge eating episode. We'd eat so much in one go and be really full. And then the next day, you have intense urges to binge eat once again, which would be the adrenaline to run and fight that animal. Now we have the privilege of having food around us. There's so many food, McDonald's, KFC, Pizza Hut, stores around. We have fridges, we have cupboards to store food, and many food processes which can help preserve foods. There's packaged foods. So we have the abundance of food, and it's really great that we have the abundance of food. But if we're having these episodes of avoiding food, then we're triggering that caveman reflex. We're gonna have urges to binge eat, or aka hunt for food. We'll have essentially dreaming about food. We'll be having these late night cravings. The adrenaline would kick in to think that we're hunting an animal, and our brain is still in our caveman mode. So if we're trying to avoid food as much as possible, we're gonna have the intense urges, even at night, to have these intense cravings. And sure, this might be a great analogy for me to talk about, and you might be thinking, okay, that's a great analogy, but where's the evidence? Well, there is evidence for having these intense cravings if we try to undereat or avoid our cravings as much as possible. If you search the study called the Minnesota Starvation Experiment, and many dietitians know about this experiment on undereating, and this happened in the around 1940s, if I could remember, around the Second World War. So essentially, these scientists tried to starve these soldiers as much as possible, try to have them undereat as many calories as possible, avoid their cravings, and what they found from the study is that they start to have these episodes of mania. They started to go crazy around food. They started to dream about food. Some people couldn't even sleep well. If you see what I'm saying here, that if you're trying to avoid food as much as possible, undereat, then you're having these same symptoms as these soldiers in the Minnesota Starvation Experiment. And the reason why there's no current studies or more recent research on starvation is because it's really, really unethical. So the last research we can find on starvation and its effects is the Minnesota Starvation Experiments in the 1940s. So I hope you understand what I'm trying to say here. So if we're trying to avoid intense cravings at night or trying to dream about food, essentially we need to get rid of physical restriction and mental restriction, keep ourselves comfortably full and satisfied. There's a difference between being full, aka avoiding physical restriction, and being satisfied, aka avoiding mental restriction. So I know it's very difficult mentally, but we need to eat regular meals, eat every 3 to 4 hours. So we need to kickstart our brain into thinking that there's food available. Our brains don't have any eyes. It still thinks that it's in the caveman era. It only sees what's coming in and coming out. So if we train our brain to have this mindset that food is coming in consistently and regularly, and we're being psychologically satisfied, then we're going to have these reduced urges to dream about food and have intense cravings at night. And if you're having intense cravings at night, I want you to think, where's restriction coming into my life? Like, what form of restriction is popping into my life? Am I undereating? Am I skipping meals? Am I not eating the foods I crave? So I'd really appreciate it if you comment below your experiences of if you've been struggling with your relationship with food, and maybe you're dreaming about food, maybe you're struggling with night snacking, and maybe if you've overcome this, then share your experience on what you did to overcome this. And I really appreciate it once again for staying along this long into the episode. And check out the link in the description of how I can support you from my freebies, from my binge eating recovery course, my ebook, my newsletter, and so many more. So I'll see you in the next episode. Bye!